Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today, joining me again is my lovely friend, Michelle Root. This,
Hi guys.
hi. This is going to be our third episode together of our series, Witch Force. However, this is going to be the second principle that we're covering today. That would be the principle of correspondence. So, Michelle and I have taken it upon ourselves to cover all seven of the principles of Hermetics. And this one is a little bit of a doozy. You would think it's kind of cut and dry, but there's just so many moving pieces associated with this principle. So we're going to just do our best today, probably approach it from a very personal place and see how it applies to our own lives. And what we observe all around us in working with this principle. But first, let's ask Michelle how she's doing. It's been a while. We wanted to do it last week, but scheduling conflicts. We both have children. We both have families. So today we finally got together. So how are you, Michelle?
I'm doing really good. Thank you. I missed doing this last week. I was kind of sad, but I know like the craziness of our lives, we kind of got to make it fit where it works. And it's kind of just how it goes. But I'm really excited to be back and I'm glad we can do this today. So
Oh, yeah.
thank
And
you.
we're only on principle 2 and we have a bunch to go. So we might
Right.
as well like settle in and get comfortable because it's going to be a while, you know?
Yeah, might as well.
So, okay, so the principle of correspondence, quite plainly put, it is as above, so below, as within, so without. And what this law alludes to is that for every macro, there is a correlating micro. And so, for what we are able to observe with the eyes, with the five senses, that there is something going on beneath the surface on different levels. And, this is one of my favorite principles because it really, it gives a lot of weight to the art of astrology, having everything to do with the macrocosms and these celestial bodies moving around and how they affect us on such an intrinsic level, whether we care to acknowledge that or not. I have yet to meet a person that is completely free of the effects of astrology, even if they don't believe it.
Right.
Like, okay, I'm sure it says in your chart somewhere, right? Okay, whatever you say. So, what are some of your initial thoughts on this particular principle?
Well, initially when I started reading and learning about it, because I'm new to this set of laws and principles. Honestly, I've been doing magic for quite some time, but you kind of jump in where you're ready to jump in, and this is one of the areas that I've never explored. So, reading about it, initially the thought that came to mind was how much power like our minds have to shape our reality. So the fact that our mind, kind of like the first law that we covered, the mind creates the reality. So as above so below, as within so without. So your mind, the way I interpret this law is your mind creates your reality, just like the first principle that we were discussing in the first video. You have the power to either shape your situation based on what's going on internally, and that's naturally going to reflect out into your world. And I think one of the things that becomes a challenge with this principle is how can you make it so your internal reality does not reflect your external situations. Like if you let's say you're a really happy person internally and something horrible happens on the external, how do you make it so you do not energetically vibe with the horrible situation that's manifesting externally? So I think that's kind of the challenge with this principle is how do you not make it happen sometimes, rather than allowing it to manifest and just, yeah, I'm happy internally, my life is happy externally. Sometimes that's not always the case. So just kind of how I interpreted it initially. So
Well, that's a really interesting observation, and I think it's super relevant to what's going on in the times right now. So
right.
many of us are just trying to find our joy and our moments of happiness when outwardly, if we look around, it would appear that things are completely going to hell. Um, But everything is not as it seems. And, interestingly enough, with all of the headlines that we're seeing lately, all of the exposure of corruption, I don't think that any of that is free of the law, this particular principle of correspondence, that what we're actually witnessing is more of a side effect, or rather an external symptom of a kind of cleansing process or purification process that's taking place within the planet herself, and therefore on a much grander scale. So it is, I always kind of thought, okay, there's something wrong with having to force yourself to be happy.
Yeah.
We look around and we're like, oh, I have everything that I ever wanted. I certainly have everything that I need, but why don't I feel happy? And so there's probably more going on there, but the whole as above, so below thing, it might not be as simple as we think. There's so many moving pieces associated with it. Probably a lot of the reason why we struggle is because we consume chemicals, we breathe chemicals, we're not actually living as humans were meant to. I mean, listen, I'm being a total hypocrite right now as I have chemicals in my makeup, chemicals in my hair, chemicals on my nails. I mean, what can I say? We're all just trying to survive, right? We're all just
right. Can't limit yourself from all the pleasures of life just to fit some type of system or personification that you're trying to merge with. It's not always possible to rid yourself of those things. And like you said, we're just humans or spirits living a human existence. So we're gonna make the best of it as we can.
Would you say that one could judge might not be a good word, but one could determine the kind of the inside of a person, or what somebody's really made of, based on outward appearances, maybe to an extent? Or do you think that's completely just not true? You can't really make a decision based entirely on appearances or external, the surface of things?
So if I'm understanding correctly, basically if you see someone outwardly, that's going to naturally reflect their internal dialogue and their internal personality.
Mm-hmm.
No, I definitely don't. I feel like a lot of people in this world are able to put on a front. They're able to put on a facade that is easily projected out to the world that reflects nothing of their internal circumstances. Or, I mean, even I'll own it myself. There's dark things that I hide. There's things that I feel and that I struggle with and I go through, but I'm never going to just let that ooze out into what I'm projecting outwardly to the world. Sometimes that is very hard to do. It's hard to repress certain things that are so below, you know what I mean? So it becomes a challenge when you're trying to balance out your true self and the self you're presenting to the world. So I think that's definitely a challenge with this law. And that's why I was asking in our text messages, can you help me out with this? Because I was struggling to find examples that were different from the law of mentalism that we did the first time, because it's a very similar concept. All these laws are very, very similar in their executions, I guess you could say, but with minute details that are slightly different in some of them. And this one I really struggled with, honestly, because I'm like, it makes sense, but at the same time, the law, I feel like sometimes the law doesn't apply. You know what I mean? Because I was just saying, there's things that are internal within me that I do not project out, and they are not so above. So how am I able to skirt the law?
I would say that what you're doing is you're utilizing the first principle of mentalism to try to sidestep the second law. And you're like, it's mind over matter at this point. So I am going to put on a happy face. I am going to, project happiness, even though on the inside I'm not feeling so great. So it is, I agree with you 100%. All of these laws they tie into each other so seamlessly. One simply doesn't work without the others in line. That being said, the reason why I brought it up, well, there's several reasons, but, here we are talking about Hermeticism, and we often talk about magic, and we have both gotten that same old question: oh, are you a white witch or a black witch? Are you a good witch or a bad witch? And so what I have been able to determine is that you can actually tell who is practicing black magic, dark magic that comes from a nasty, ugly place with the intention to do nothing but harm. Over time, you will start to see this. You will start to see it in the faces of, it's in the skin, it's in the auric field. And if you look at a lot of the people, the global elite that are implicated right now in all kinds of heinous crimes, if you really get a look at them, you can see not even all the money in the world can mask the truth about these people, because it's all coming through the eyes. And after a while, it all comes through the skin. So they utilize, all manner of medical advancements, and these people have no monetary limit. And still, they are not able to beat the law of correspondence, which is as above, so below. And those of us with eyes to see, we can clearly observe that these people are just rotten. And so, some people are really, really good at manipulating their, their persona and their image, but I feel like you can't keep that up forever. That kind of thing eventually just starts to ooze out, and we see, oh, wow, these people are preying on children. These people are, feasting on blood. This is how they're actually garnering their life force. So, and it's all across the board. Astrology is my favorite example of this particular principle, because it really does speak to how everything, even the anatomical systems, like our bodies, our feet, our capillaries, our veins, our lungs, everything has a kind of celestial or planetary correlation to it. And so we're like Mercury, for example, has everything to do with communications, logistics, technology. And as soon as Mercury goes retrograde, we feel it. Right?
Yeah.
And people that know nothing about astrology, people that consciously reject astrology, they don't even realize that all of a sudden they're like, oh man, nothing's working. And it's like, Mercury just went retrograde on you, bro. Like, there's no escaping.
And unless they have like an understanding of like basic astrology, it's hard to explain it to someone, because I think the most popular example of the law of correspondence that most people know is the moon and the tides and how it affects us for the full moon. But that's where it ends. Everyone's like, the moon affects us, and there's a full moon, so everybody's acting crazy. They understand that, but it stops right there. They stop with any other celestial bodies, and they don't understand, okay, the sun does the same thing. Mercury, Pluto, everything is connected, and everything is going to manifest here on this plane, on this earth for us. And it can be hard to explain that to some people. And something that when you were talking about like the global elite and all the crazy shit that's happening with that, I was looking at a picture yesterday or the other day of Epstein, and I was just looking at his face, and I can't look at his face for very long. So what you were saying about how you can just feel it, it's almost like our empathic traits of being able to pull that out of somebody and pull out their energy to be able to assess it. Mm-hmm. When somebody's that vile, their below comes out really quick for us to be able to, assess. And it just gave me the creeps, like when he said that, because I looking at him, I couldn't stare at his face for very long, because I can see everything that I feel that he's done. And I'm like, so being an empath with this law, kind of, when you're dealing with other people, can be hard, because you can see their below, whether they're hiding it above or not. And so that might be something that, as we learn and grow learn how to apply these laws, maybe working on blocking being able to do that from some people, because I don't want that energy and within me. I don't want to be able to take some people's below and, you know, be able to bring it into my aura. You know what I mean? So.
Well, that's so interesting. And it's, you know, he may have some people fooled. You know, I'm sure a lot of people over the course of his life, and we are talking about Epstein, just so everybody knows, you know, I'm sure a lot of people would have characterized him as being very charming, you know, easy to get along with, a guy that likes to just party and have a good time. But as you can see, what is within ultimately shows itself and comes out, and you know, some things just really can't remain hidden. When you have that large of a profile and you're working with that kind of money on that kind of level and that kind of blackmail and manipulation, it really is only a matter of time. And we touched on it earlier, but this particular principle, it actually, for me, it provides me with a sense of excitement, because when I look around and I do see what's going on, and some people would see this as the end of the world, and other people, and you and I talked about this all the time, and
Right.
some people see this as, you know, the Great Awakening. You know, it really depends on that perspective, on from what vantage point you are observing this particular reality. And so I'm really interested to know what is taking place on these other levels, whether that be, you know, in the you know, in everything that's going on underneath the firmament, what's going on underneath our feet. I really, you know, I can't say for sure. I'd have to, you know, create some kind of streamlined channel connection, and that would be funny. I'm sure a lot of people would, you know, laugh at that. They'd be interested to see that, be like, oh, there she goes. Again.
Off again.
But definitely there is everything that we're seeing is corresponding to some kind of massive shift taking place. And so whether you're excited about it or whether you're terrified of it has a direct correlation to your current state of mind and your current state of understanding. And so for you, you know, what is it how would you describe what we're seeing right now? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Is it somewhere in the middle?
I definitely feel like it's somewhere in the middle, because, you know, as we've always discussed, you know, we have very different vantage points of what's going on. And without getting too much into my, you know, political beliefs or anything like that, I do feel like it depends on where you're at socially, economically, racially, you know, wealth-wise. All these things, all these factors matter in how you're interpreting what's going on right now, and also your spiritual abilities, your ability to, like I said in the first video that we did, to step back and kind of assess everything minus the emotions, looking at everything that's manifesting without adding your own personal bias into it. I believe there's a lot of good things happening, and I believe there's a lot of bad things happening simultaneously. So it's almost like for our world, we go 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward. You know, it's like this dance that we're doing. You know, we see all this, all these rings being busted and people being outed, and then we have a mass shooting. And then it's like, so I believe, you know, it ties into the game that the elite and everybody, that they're trying to play on our emotions and play on the fact that we're in this dance, so they can get us excited about these positive things, and then this horrible thing happens to keep us in that state. So they never want us to get to that happy place or that positive place. And I'm a big believer in, no matter your circumstances, good or bad, you always have to find the positives in it. You always, no matter what it is, seeing someone that's homeless that is able to have, you know, such a positive attitude despite their living circumstances or those situations, that's a perfect example of not allowing your outer world to affect who you are internally. And I believe that's so important now in this day and age, especially for people that do feel like things are going to shit and the world is falling apart. You have to find the good, you know, you have to find the connections with other people that uplift you. You have to find the you have to find the happiness, and you can't, it's almost like the law, when this law is in reverse, like if you allow the below to, or if you allow one or the other to dominate your psyche more than the other, then that's where you kind of have problems. It's like you kind of have to respect the balance and the flow of this law, and understand that if you tip to one side or the other, then you're going to have an issue. But if you stay like within that healthy medium, it allows you to not allow this chaos and this static of the world to fuck up your internal. So I just stay focused with everything that's going on. I try to not, like, I address the problems that are happening, you know, racial issues and political issues. I address them and I don't minimize them, but I also don't allow them to rule my life. I don't allow them to pull me into this state of depression where I just feel like everything's hopeless. You know, I have so many good things going for me in my life. It would be so sad to just be sucked into that negative mindset constantly, and then create my own prison, in addition to feeling like the world is a prison itself, you know? So it's like this double negative going on. And I'm not saying that's easy for a lot of people to do. Obviously, there's some horrible circumstances in the world where people are being abused and harmed and, you know, killed. And I'm not saying, you know, love and light, just project love and light, everything's going to be okay. Like, you have to be a realist about things, and you have to be logical. But at the same time, I don't know, I've never been one to like fully succumb to my situations. I've always tried to stay in that middle ground, you know, where I have the most control. You know, as soon as I allow something to fully take over my experience in life, then I'm no longer in control of my own vessel, my own universe. And that's really important to me, to have that balance.
Well, what you're doing there too is you're utilizing another principle when you do that, is you're utilizing the principle of vibration. And so, you're utilizing the principle of vibration and mentalism to kind of force yourself to stay into this, into this bracket here, where we are not going to swing like a pendulum and, you know, be all the way over here in extreme darkness or all the way over here in extreme light. And so it really is a balancing act. You know, some of the original students of Hermeticism that actually, you know, wrote these principles, studied these principles, students of Hermes Trismegistus, it's important to note that all of this came from a deity known as Hermes, or Thoth, Quetzalcoatl, feathered serpent, many names across many cultures. But one of the standouts to me was that they always stressed that we can all share these principles. We can learn about them, read about them, practice them as well, but that the ultimate goal was to be able to utilize these and control these, dominate these. I shouldn't say dominate, but truly use these instead of the other way around. Because we can have an academic understanding of these principles, but if we're kind of willy-nilly about it, the forces of the universe will use us. These powers, these kinds of forces can really play us like pawns. And it's not some god or vengeful deity that's fiddling with us or anything like that. But when we work with these principles, we work with these laws, we don't realize that this is us versus us at the end of the day. It really is us versus us. And I shouldn't say it's a competition. It should always be about integration. But it is very much human nature. It's kind of like the original human flaw. We are flawed. We're not perfect. So, you know, these original students really did put a lot of emphasis on making these laws work for you and not allowing the laws to work you, because it's just too easy to become a slave to this, to, you know, just be, you know, allow the turbulence and you know, the swing and sway of the ocean to just kind of churn us around. So the goal here really is to integrate and understand these principles and create some kind of harmony. Now, what's really interesting, one of the more interesting parts of this particular principle is that if you look at, and these days where everybody is able to sink their teeth into information about frequency, tones, different the different light, like the way that the eye detects light. And I actually just recently realized that certain frequencies have a correspondence in color. So a certain sound, that's kind of like if you've ever heard anybody talk about tripping on acid or any kind of psychedelic drug, they report seeing sounds and hearing colors. That is the principle of correspondence in action. When we open up those gateways inside the mind, we then we then kind of create these windows into that particular principle, where we understand that there is a correlation between a certain color, a correlating frequency to that color, a correlating tone and vibration. And when we, step into those realms, we're then able to feel all of that and sense all of that omnipotently. And so I just think isn't that just so fascinating?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I can attest to that. Not that for me personally, psychedelics were always very terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
Due to exactly what you're saying, the fact that you can instantaneously manifest whatever it is you're thinking internally will be projected out into your vision. And that always scared the shit out of me when I used to partake in that when I was younger. And you're absolutely right. You could see music, you could see smells, you could hear smells. I mean, every sense was like crisscrossed, and it was so overwhelming. Some people might like that, and I'm not downplaying anybody that chooses to partake in that, but for me it was absolutely so overwhelming. And the best analogy that I can compare an acid trip to is the scene in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, when they're in the hotel room and he's talking to the lady at the front desk, and everything just starts to melt and just go every kind of which way. It's a lot, but it definitely opens a doorway within our minds that allows us to do that and allows us to reach those other dimensions. Whereas, being sober and not utilizing those methods, that door is kind of closed. And so it's interesting that you brought that up, because I've always thought the world of psychedelics and just expanding your mind is so fascinating, but you definitely have to be prepared, educated, and in a safe environment to do so, because
it's not for everybody. And
no.
I just made a post about this recently, and this is not to judge anybody in that community. I truly believe that things like psilocybin, ayahuasca, peyote, all of, DMT, all of these substances have a very important place in our ancestral memory, in our culture, and also in the healing process of the collective human psyche. That being said, there are some folks that just ought to not experiment with these substances whatsoever. I believe I'm similar to you in the sense that I don't want to do that, because we're already in and out. I use the term 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I don't need to be reminded. I know. You know what I mean? I work in those energies all the time. So to go ahead and ingest a substance and just kind of kick it up 20 notches, to me, it's not exactly necessary. And we can certainly look around and see how, shaman culture, it's kind of like a new age trend now, where Western folks are out here, in the Amazon setting up these retreats, and they're bringing people in from all over the world to do these shamanistic journeys with the use of ayahuasca and DMT, and people are dying out there. And, people are they're using this as a kind of crutch. Now, listen, I really do love, the idea of the collective psyche being healed by things like magic mushrooms and that sort of thing in a very responsible way. But, Terence McKenna is one of my favorites. Everybody, if you guys don't know who Terence McKenna is, please go ahead and look up some of his material. Kind of controversial. People think he was a CIA agent. I'm like, these days, who isn't a CIA? I don't know. Like, give me a break. You know what I mean? Like, It's okay. We can listen to what somebody has to say, and, there's some gems in there for sure. But what it is, we're not meant to do these sort of things every week, every weekend. You open the door, you learn what you can, you step back out, and you apply what you've learned. And so these days, it's certainly being abused. I don't know. I can't remember exactly why we got into that. I think we were talking about, so it was the correspondence, the colors, the frequencies, the tone, all of those things. So, and that's where a lot of people use various modalities of healing and also of study. Philosophers and scholars can actually utilize this particular principle to learn about archangels and archons and different energies that exist in different dimensions based on what we have right here. Because the principle of correspondence states that everything is a reflection of something else and that it stays consistent. So we can know the unknowable based on what little information that we have, if this principle stands. So it's kind of like a formula, you can predict what's going to happen based on this formula and what we've seen it do time and time again. So it's kind of like, I don't know, I just feel like science really underutilizes the cult of science in Western society. We put way too much emphasis on science. I think it's a relatively new thing. I think it's now owned by a select few. So it's like a privatized corporation more than an actual unbiased, neutral group of people that are just looking to figure things out. Now we've got the global warming, we've got, all, and I don't know how you feel about it, but I'm just speaking my mind here. But I think that people in general could use these principles to understand what we previously thought to be completely unknowable, things that we couldn't conceive.
Well, and science too is owned. So I feel like you can literally hire a scientist to perform an experiment and get the result that you want to prove whatever point you're trying to make. In this day of information, like I was talking to someone the other day and I was like, it almost feels impossible to ever uncover the truth because there's so many truths. You could literally find a truth to every single situation and base it off some level of evidence. Just look on Googling anything on the internet. You could be like, oh, this is fact checked. And it's like, is it really? Like, how do you know that? Because there's so many different truths out there. And I feel like science had good intentions. Like you're saying, it's so privatized now, though. There's hands in it that don't belong in it. And it's what's the word? Sorry, the word is beyond me, but it's basically like exploiting the field of science and what it truly was meant to represent. And now we don't have the confidence in relying on it anymore because it's like, yeah, whatever, that was proven, whatever. Everybody is kind of going off of their own eyes nowadays, and you can read something and it's up to you to believe it or not. And your own experiences are so much more powerful sometimes than anything you can read online or anything you can hear online. And I think it's important that people form their own opinions and value and make their own values based on what they see and what they interpret, because your reality is not mine. My reality is not yours. So it's a mess, like, honestly, in regards to that. It's sad because I feel like we don't really have any truth anymore as a whole. It's just all over the place.
As a whole, we definitely don't. I'm sorry, my phone keeps going off here. I just want to...
It's okay. Make sure it's not anything important.
It's, it's like a group message from the school, but everything's fine. Yeah, everything's fine. But no, you know what? You're absolutely right. For enough money, one of these philanthropists, like George Soros kind of guy, or somebody to that effect, and for that matter, Epstein had his dirty paws in science, in virtual reality, in eugenics. He was very interested and wanted a stake in in how the collective is absorbing this kind of information. So for the right price, you can fake science. You can put whatever you want. You can publish whatever you want in the textbooks that our kids are getting for the right price, which is terrifying to me. And that's why what I love about these 7 principles is that they really are quite simple. I mean, listen, it's not that the mechanics of the universe are simple, because they're anything but that, but they make sense. They make sense. Once you really break it all down, it all really does make sense. And I think, now we're in such a time of convoluted information, when it's basically this gang versus this gang, and it's this money versus this money, agenda versus agenda. But if we were to get back to basics and talk about these principles, share these principles with our families, our friends, our children, I think that what this does is this arms us each with those tools of perception, with those tools of common sense, where it's like, what I'm seeing makes me detect something. Maybe that's where the principle of correspondence is coming in, or the principle of gender, or the principle of vibration. And maybe I should listen to my gut, and maybe I should, maybe the foundation on which people perceive reality and move through reality is a lot more simple than we were originally led to believe. Science is a cult, you guys. Modern science is a privatized gang at this point, and it cannot be trusted anymore. I just wrote an article. I shouldn't say I wrote an article. I wrote a post. I don't have like a, it's not like that. I wish it was. If anybody's hiring, I'd love to do some freelance writing. But a miraculously brilliant Indian scientist came up with, he realized that there is something called bioluminescence. Sonoluminescence, and the kind of lovingly assigned term was bubble fusion. And he realized that light can create sound. Okay, and this was a huge, people were like, the science community, they were like, oh, here's all the money you need to come up with this stuff. And when he really could like prove it, and it was able to be repeated and recreated, they dragged his name through the mud, because they wanted to take what he learned, what he discovered, and they completely wanted to turn it on its head, use it for themselves, hide it from people, just, completely squander it all. And it just goes to show we cannot, as a whole, put trust into, the people at the top. We can't trust that, the people that are funding our scientists are going to do what's in the best interest of humanity. And we'd be kidding ourselves if we thought that they didn't already have access and full knowledge of technologies that would change the face of this planet tomorrow. So that's why, and Hermetics, these principles, they really break it down for us in a way that we allow our inner knowing to take the helm, which is so much more powerful than any kind of bought and paid for propaganda that they're just peddling out to the kids. And now the kids don't even know what they're talking about. They really don't. They just parrot something else, and it's quite sad. But I still hold out hope.
Well, I remember a conversation we had a long time ago. It was I think this was when Bird Box, the movie Bird Box, came out.
Oh, yes.
Something that's tying in everything that you're talking about, where, the higher ups projecting this onto society is, I remember we're talking about the show Stranger Things. That's a perfect example of as above, so below. And something that always stuck with me that you had said was the fact that them making that type of show, or making a show like Bird Box, it projects that reality out into the collective, and we take that as truth. So it kind of ties into what you're saying about what's really true or not, and showing that duality in the splits and dimensions, and showing that lack of trusting our senses. It feeds into our subconscious and plants that seed and turns that as above, so below into a reality for us, because we are now people are grasping those concepts and projecting those ideologies that those shows are putting out, and it's becoming a true reality for more and more people. And as a collective, the more and more people that are thinking the same thoughts, it's naturally going to manifest on this plane and other planes. And so I always thought that always has stuck with me when we had that conversation, because I'm like, damn, that is some deep ass shit.
Yeah.
That is so deep. It's true though, that seed is planted on the as above, and we, as not knowing the laws and principles, and like you said, allowing it to just use us rather than we use it, naturally we're like, wow, this huge, it's this power of suggestion ultimately. So
it is the power of suggestion. It is programming. Listen, the elite, we really can refer to the elite as an it, okay? Because at this point, it's not just one person, 3 people, 800 people. It's an it. It is now a thing, okay?
yeah.
It's a thing. It knows where we're going. It has a sentience about it. Maybe it's AI. And it realizes that the human spirit is rising. And it realizes that what the human collective is in need of from where they're standing, they would very much like to be able to channel and herd this very tangible, measurable human energy. They're using the principle of mentalism, because if you were to get together all of the thoughts, emotions, visions of every human being on the planet and kind of get that into a bottle, like, that's just the most powerful thing in the universe, in the known universe. And so what they're trying to do is channel the collective mental energy of the planet and get ahead of the narrative. And the narrative at this point is there's an exposure going on of corruption. So they want to say, okay, we're going to control the exposure, and we're going to control what kind of corruption. So there's only so much they can do. That's why they utilize emotionally, these shows that incite so much emotion within us, because that gets us on board. That's how they get into us, into the brain, is through the heart. So that's how they rope us in with these emotional shows and movies. I loved Stranger Things when it first came out. I won't watch it anymore, because I know that what they're doing, this is it's an exploitation. It's an exploitation, essentially. And, sorry, lightning.
Like, what was that?
I thought somebody was knocking on my door. I'm telling you, every time we've done a show now, it's been, but I digress. The Stranger Things thing, all of the Netflix shows, the OA, listen, Netflix is owned by and funded so much by the Soros party, the Soros group. So we just have to be very careful with what they sell us. 9 truths, and the 10th thing is a lie. And that one lie is what generates this entire debacle. And it just makes things, it leads people down this sketchy road. So we have to be very careful about the shows that we're watching, the information that we're taking in. Now, all of a sudden, people think it's funny to want to travel to the upside down or bring demigorgons in. Like, they think it's funny. Some people that don't understand what's going on, they think that's funny. But people like you and me, we know there is something like the upside down. Talk about the principle of correspondence. Are you kidding me? There is an upside down. Then there's the opposite. There's something else. There's many different things. But they're trying to make it like pop culture now, to mess around with these things and to manipulate and exploit the natural ability of human beings to create our reality. They're simply trying to get ahead of the narrative and take control of the herd. That's where I stand with all of it. And I think it's
well, and I agree. And I think to add to that, the throes of religion kind of keep a tight rein on that and discourage free thought, discourage the expansion of consciousness, because once you're aware of these things, like you mentioned earlier, then you can arm yourself, then we can utilize it the same way they're utilizing it. And that is what they want. They want to discourage the connections that we have to ourselves, discourage the connections that we have to these laws and the power that we truly hold as individuals and sovereign beings. And that's why one of the saddest things I feel like when I started learning about magic and just, all aspects of it, how it's been devalued for, hundreds of thousands of years and looked down upon. And at the core of it all, it's people are afraid of the people having the power. They don't want us to know these things that we're sharing right now, because as a collective, if everybody knew what we knew, we would ultimately not need them. We would not need their force, their energy and their forces anymore. And we would be completely sovereign in our reality. And that's terrifying for them, because that means a lack of control. Mm-hmm. So all this is so fascinating to me, and it's also heartbreaking at the same time to see other people walking blindly, not knowing their truths, not knowing their power, and not knowing that they ultimately have so much more control than they give themselves credit for in their own lives. And I think that talking about these principles, sharing them, sharing our perspectives is really, it's helpful to others, because it can help them understand, like, damn, I don't need to be a victim of everything now that I have this knowledge. I can flip it around on its head and say, no, I'm not allowing this to manifest. Something that I always tell people that are so worried, for example, in Wicca, there's the law, the Wiccan Rede, do basically the same as do unto others as you do to yourself. And I'm a firm believer in the fact that karma in and of itself can essentially only harm you if you allow it to harm you. That's my personal belief. I don't know. A lot of people believe in karma and they believe in, you get out what you put back. I'm not saying I don't believe in that, but to an extent. You can't just allow outside forces to dictate your existence, and some laws are not always true to form. You have the ability, if you know and have an understanding of them, to manipulate them to your advantage. So don't always take all these laws at face value. Dissect them, understand what they truly mean, and learn how you as individuals can utilize that, rather than, like you said, being just it's happening to me rather than I am controlling it. It's so important to grasp that for all the principles and really all concepts of philosophies of life. We have so much power, and I just want to speak life into people and let them know, like, you're not a victim of your circumstance every time. There's circumstances that bring horrible events into our existence, but ultimately it is you that has the power to decide whether that's going to hinder you or that's going to benefit you. So I love these laws because it allows you some control over your life. It allows you to have that.
It does. It's so empowering. It's so empowering, especially in light of everything that's going on right now. The elites are so invested in getting us to think that we have no control, and that we are, and that what little control we do have is dirty and should come from a place of mental illness, which these days are trying to peddle off mental illness as individuality, as freedom of expression. And we'll get to that another time, but there's even now very fundamental misconceptions about what mental illness is, and there's a fine line. So they're trying to encourage people to be powerful and be the leader of your own life from a place of mental illness, which is very dangerous. So we do have to go here. Unfortunately, today's show is going to have to be kind of short, but there's so much coming up for Michelle and I. Folks, please go to Michelle's website, it's RoxyRoseCandleCo.com. I wanted to say company because co is short for company.
Kind of flows off the tongue, right?
It does. It really does. So I will put that in the description. And folks, if you'd like to get a tarot reading from me, please go to jennymoonstone.com. And hopefully Michelle and I can reconvene next week to cover the third principle. And maybe next time we'll get to go a little bit longer than today. And hopefully next time there isn't a torrential lightning storm outside. Kind of messing with my light and my connection, and my dog is a little bit nervous. So folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Michelle, thank you so much for being here. I hope everybody has a wonderful week.
Thank you so much. Bye guys. Have a nice day.